Hello, Photography Dog. Alex Schultz here. Welcome to episode 243 of the Photography Dog Success Interviews. Today's success story comes from Springfield, Missouri. It gives me great pleasure to introduce my guest, Randy Henderson. Randy, my friend, what do you say? You ready to get this going?
Hey, sounds great. Let's do it.
All right, folks. Randy has been a photographer since the young age of 10, a professional for the last 35 years with heavy focus on real estate photography. Now, Randy, I've given our listeners just a taste of what you and I are going to be talking about. Before we dive into these questions, can you share with our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. I'm a 60-year-old photographer. I live in Springfield, Missouri with my wife, Victoria, and I've got two grown kids. We've got a couple of cats, and I spend about every waking minute out shooting real estate photography.
That's awesome. Randy, we're about to jump into your journey as a photographer. To get the ball going, what has you most excited about the photography industry today?
Well, you got to remember, I started back in the film days when I got excited when digital photography started, and I couldn't believe that I could shoot one shot at ISO 6400 and the next shot at ISO 50. And the fact that I didn't have to buy film and I didn't have to buy developing and all that. But the technology that is existing now, where the cameras are getting smaller and the ISOs are getting more ridiculous. And I've got a cell phone that does the kind of photography that I would have drooled over when I was in commercial photography school 35 years ago. So I think those are the kinds of things that really excite me, and it's kind of a race between how far will the technology go while I'm still in the industry. So,
yep, I couldn't agree more. And it's funny that you bring that up. It'll be interesting to see what comes in the next 5 years for these little gadgets, or our phones, rather.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Randy, you and I are going to have a blast here right now. You and I are going to do something really, really fun. We're going to jump in the Wayback Machine. I know, a lot of fun. Let's go back to the very day, the very morning that you picked up a camera for the very first time. Randy, what was the original inspiration for doing so?
My mom had bought an Argus 75 twin lens reflex film camera when she was in high school. It would have been probably like 1948. And it was sitting under a cupboard in our house. And when I was about 10, I stumbled across it one day looking for something else. And I said, "What is this?" She said, "It's a camera." And I said, "Can I play with it?" And inexplicably, she said, "Yeah, go ahead." I had a paper out at the time, and I spent every dime of that paper out money on film and developing. Now, I lived in a really small town, so the developing took, 12, 14 days or something. And I was just fascinated. I was fascinated with the process, And growing up in a small town called Rangeville, Idaho, out in the middle of nowhere, that you could do this and come back with these things that you created yourself. So that was my inspiration.
Wow, that was the hook right there.
Sure.
Randy, tell us about your first photo that really validated your interest as a photographer. Do you remember what that photo was?
Yeah, I do. A couple of years after I got that camera, I had been out shooting. I was shooting color film at the time, and I shot some picture, and I entered it into the contest with the paper route that I was working for, and I won second place. It was like $15 or something, and there was like 300 entrants, and I won second, and I couldn't believe it. I don't even remember. I think it was called Arroyo Sunrise or something. It was just like a sunrise over a farm. But yeah, I got a $15 check, and I still somewhere, although I've moved and I don't know where it is, I still have the stub of that check somewhere.
That's awesome.
Yeah, 50 years later. So, yeah.
So when you were starting out, Randy, what was your biggest challenge, and how did you overcome from that?
Well, I think my biggest challenge, of course, was financial when I started, because I didn't have a lot of money, and a roll of film cost a lot of money, and developing costed a lot of money, and it took, like I said, you went to Irwin Drug to drop the film off, and you didn't get the pictures back for 12 days. And I lived in a small enough town, this is pre-internet, obviously, where I think we had 2 books on photography in our library. And if you were to get the little card out to fill out the checkout thing, it was my name all the way down the card, because I just kept checking them out over and over and over again. So the challenge was I had a lot more curiosity than there was resources available for me to learn what I was doing.
Wow, it's funny, Randy, as you talk about the card in the back of the book, that in my head, like, wow, you know what? I interview a lot of folks, and I have not yet had have somebody give such a clear picture, a reminder of what it was like to check out a book and the cards and the names in the back. I'm like,
Yeah.
Awesome. Randy, what do you enjoy photographing most?
I would say real estate. And I know that sounds like cop since I've got a real estate company, but there's just something very, I was a wedding and portrait photographer for a long time when I was getting started. And, I would photograph a $10,000 wedding. Back then, that was a lot of money. And I got married in my front yard. So it wasn't like I had a lot of experience with $10,000 weddings and I didn't know you were supposed to have the third bridesmaid pose with the fourth groomsman or whatever it was that I'd missed. There's something very zen about doing real estate photography because the furniture isn't going anywhere. Nobody's complaining, that I missed something. We don't have any babies that are, not going to smile in every picture. I don't know. I think it's real estate photography, to be real honest with you.
What has been your proudest moment as a photographer?
I would have to say the very first time that I ever took a real estate photo legitimately, it was a house that had been on the market for a year and it sold 4 days after I took the picture. And that was when I realized this is something that I can do. This is something that I can offer to people that is going to be a legitimate business.
Yeah, I'm going to sidetrack us just for a moment here because you just brought up something here. So earlier I asked you what was the photo that validated your interest as a photographer, which is kind of a global setting. So I'm going to ask a kind of a piggyback question on top of that.
Sure.
What was this incident that you just gave right here of your proudest moment in photography? Was this the moment that validated your interest as a real estate photographer?
I would say yes, because when they asked me to do this, it was an agent that actually came to me and said, I think the real estate industry is going to fundamentally change. And what they were realizing were that these realtors were sitting on floor duty in the offices, waiting for people to come in the office and waiting for phone calls, and it wasn't happening. They were going months without having anybody come in the office. And when they get calls, they would say, well, hey, instead of talking about it, let's go out and meet at the house. And these people would say, oh, I've already seen the house on the internet. And the realtors, red flags are going off like, uh-oh. And so they called me and said, look, I think our industry is going to change, but if they're going to be looking at these houses online, maybe I need better pictures. And it was a forward-thinking agent that decided this. So I went out. I had just gotten a digital camera. I was very late to adopt a digital because I'd gone to commercial photography school for 2 years with film, and what I was essentially doing was admitting that I was going to throw all that knowledge out the window and start over again at age 40 or 5 or whatever I was. And so I took this digital camera. It was a Nikon D50, by the way, 6 megapixels. And I took it up to this house. I did the best I could based on my commercial photography knowledge. Came back. My wife was looking over my shoulder as I was putting them on the multi-list, and she goes, these are multi-list photographs? And I go, yeah. And she says, it looks like a commercial photo shoot. And I said, well, that's how I was trained to take pictures. And then the girl called me 4 days later, and she goes, you're not going to believe this. A guy from New Jersey just called me and wants to buy this house. And he put down $10,000 of non-refundable. In our part of the country, those kind of out-of-town buyers were never, that just didn't happen. And that's when I said, oh, I'm going to see what I can do with this.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very positive experience that you just shared there. So I want to jump on the other side. If you could, tell us about a time in your photographic journey, Randy, if you would, where you failed at something. And what I'm looking for is a very specific example here. And then if you would, share us, how did you get up and pivot from that moment?
That's easy. When I first moved here, I went to commercial photography school in Spokane, Washington for 2 years. And when I got out, I came to Missouri with my wife. She was from here. And we came out to help take care of her dad. And I thought, oh, it's easy. I'll find photography work out here. I'm a commercial photographer, 4x5 view cameras and all. Moved out here, and it was an absolute disaster. There was maybe one commercial studio. The people had been there for 30 years. They were going to hire relatives, not somebody that they'd never heard of from another part of the country they'd never been to. We have Bass Pro is centered out here. They did commercial work, but they weren't going to hire except local people, and I don't believe they paid very well. And so I spent the first 2 years of my adult life out here trying to get kids through high school while working in 1-hour photo labs. I mean, literally doing weddings on weekends for people that couldn't afford anybody else. And I even worked for a year at a local amusement park called Silver Dollar City as their tintype photographer. It's like an old themed park from the 1880s, and I was in it, and here was this camera, this 4x5 view camera from the 1880s, and I said, hey, I know how to run that. And so I did that for a year. So that was probably the part of my life where I said, maybe I've made a horrible mistake here. But the way I pivoted out of it was the guy that sold us our first house said, you've got a business degree, you'd probably be a good realtor. And I said, okay, I'm going to be a realtor during the week, and I'll be a wedding and portrait photographer. And I kind of thought that's what was going to happen until the real estate industry adopted photography in a major way.
Wow. We all have weaknesses, Randy. If you would, what is your weakness relating to photography?
If I had to say, it's my inability to adjust to technology. Like I said, when I got out of commercial photography school, I was an expert at doing 4x5, developing the 4x5 negatives and color dye separations and pin registration and all this stuff that you might know what it is, but a lot of these kids that are, people that are under 30, they certainly don't know what it is. And when this industry flipped, it took a while for me to say, okay, I'm basically going to discard the last 2 years of my life and relearn all this stuff again. That's why it took me so long to get a digital camera, because I was just sort of in denial about
it. Nailing a composition right can be an absolute challenge. What do you think is the master to nailing composition?
I think the trick to it is that you have to learn how to see two-dimensionally. That's the biggest problem that we have. When you start out as a wedding photographer, the first thing that you end up doing is shooting a beautiful portrait of a bride with a foam pole coming out of the back of her head. First thing that you do. And the reason for that is because you have two eyes, so you see in 3 dimensions. And when I walk out my door, I'm not afraid I'm going to walk into a foam pole that's right in front of me because it's across the street and I can see that. The trick is to unlearn that and to see the world in 2 dimensions. And once you do that, you can't undo it. I think once you learn how to do that, you can't unlearn it. And you automatically see, oh, that's a great composition. I do that all the time. I can remember my wife and I were watching Forrest Gump again the other night for whatever reason. And she commented at the end, that's a great movie. And I can remember thinking to myself, the only thing I got out of that movie is, hey, in that last scene, Tom Hanks is bent over and his shape is exactly like those mailboxes on the right hand of the screen. That's great composition. It's like you've turned it on and you can't turn it back off again.
In the back of my head, I'm trying to visualize that end scene there, so hence my pause.
It was, and it was totally intentional. You'll see it. It's at the end of the movie. You'll see it, and you'll go. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. But you're right. Now that the rule of thirds and contrasting colors and all that stuff. Now when I go to movies, that's what I see. I mean, I'm watching the movie, but I'm also going, oh, the art director meant to do that right there. It's sort of a problem with the business. But I mean,
Randy, I think not only for myself, I think everybody that's watching this interview is going to be running to their Netflix or their wherever they have movies and watching it. Like, okay, I see what Randy was talking about.
You'll see it, and understand that isn't an accident. That is, there was some guy that sees like I do that goes out there and goes, I shot a house, I don't know, a year ago, and on the door they had it was just a little 2-bedroom bungalow. It wasn't fancy. In fact, it was pretty rundown. 100-year-old house probably. They had stenciled hello on the door, in like script. And so I opened the door and I took the gear in, and I had too much gear in my hands to shut the door. Turned around, and here is 2/3 of the house, and then 1/3, and it's in my screen, by the way. 1/3 is this door open with the word hello across it. And 5 years ago, I wouldn't have seen that. I'd have just shut the door. But now I turned around and I saw that, and I was like, well, there's my first shot right there. And it's just, you just see in 2 dimensions.
That is so cool. Randy, there are many photographers out there that are just starting out, and they frankly don't have the money to buy the camera gear that they want. What advice would you give to them?
You know, it's funny that you should ask that. I just looked in December online at Nikon's system, and there was a Nikon D3500 with 2 lenses that spanned from 24 to 300 for $500. I think it was a little under $500. That's absurd. That the quality of that camera and the things that camera can do, and I'm sure Canon has the same, the same stuff, but that is a ridiculous amount. If you can master the Nikon D3500 and those 2 lenses to the point where you say, I really need something else, you're a long ways down that road toward becoming a professional photographer. So my suggestion would be, buy the cheapest camera that you can get and just start learning.
How do you feel photography has impacted the way that you see the world?
It's funny. Of course, we talk about the composition thing all the time, and I see the world a lot more in colors and in composition than I ever used to. I'll go into a house and there'll be a cerulean blue throw pillow on a gray couch, and I'll be attracted to that immediately. Color pops are something that you, especially in real estate photography, that you're interested in. It's really funny. People think in real estate photography, it's most important to get a good, clear shot of the living room. I call those inventory shots. Yes, somebody wants to see the living room. Yes. But if I want to engage them to stay on the website and stay on the pictures longer, which you do, that's the point. Some of those color pop pictures and seeing the world in those compositional elements are what really keep people on the website and drive them to go look at those houses.
Wow. Folks, this is one of those examples of, you're talking about a veteran here that has a massive amount of pedigree in the industry, and he's just dropping nuggets upon nuggets here for you. This is where you're going to want to watch this review, or watch this interview, go back, take notes, watch it again. Great answer, Randy. And speaking of fellow photographers out there, what do you see photographers doing today, Randy, that if they did it differently tomorrow would ultimately improve their success?
One of the things that I was in Paris about 5 years ago with my wife, and of course cell phones galore, and the Louvre was absolutely almost empty, except when we went into the room where the Mona Lisa was, and there was 500 people in there. I couldn't get within, 100 feet of the Mona Lisa. And it was all cell phones being held up from a million miles away and shot, and then the people would turn around and leave. Now that was the astounding part to me, is they were probably 100 feet from the Mona Lisa, and instead of going up and looking at the painting, they got the, and you could tell what it was. It wasn't, I want to see the painting. It was, I want other people to know that I was here. And, it's about me. It's not about the painting. And I thought, you can get a better copy of the painting on a postcard in the gift shop. If you walk 100 more feet, you could actually see the painting. And I would say, stop shooting randomly. Shoot with purpose. Think for the extra second and say, why am I taking this picture? What's the purpose of it? And in that room, ironically, a picture from the back of the room of the crowd in front of the Mona Lisa was a far more interesting shot than the actual picture of the painting. So I would say it's so easy to pick this thing up and just start shooting. Think before you shoot for an extra second.
Excellent advice. Excellent advice. And it's funny because I've been in that same room that you speak about there, and you're right. It's hordes of people, and it's very difficult to get anywhere near that thing.
Yeah.
To get your creative eye focused, where do you draw your inspiration from?
Books, magazines, and other photographers. I call this beating myself up. I beat myself up about once a week. Because I shot a house last year that was just incredible. It was all white. They had the lights all off in there, and they came out as good as anything I've ever shot. art-wise and technically wise. And I came home puffed up thinking, wow, I'm a great real estate photographer. That to me is more detrimental to my business than anything else I can do. I allow myself about 15 minutes to pat myself on the back. Then I go to Flickr, or I go to any one of a number of other sites where there's a bunch of other real estate photographers on there, and I purposely look at stuff that's better than mine. And there's a ton of it out there. And then after 20 minutes, I go, oh yeah, I'm not that good after all. And it inspires me to be better the next day. I don't ever want to get complacent. I don't ever want to think, oh, well, I've figured this out. Because that's my motivation to go out. And so I'll look at magazines all the time and think, yeah, I want to do these 10 shots in the next 12 months. You know, I want to do this quality of idea. You and I were talking earlier about the mood shots that I do as part of a real estate. A part of it I'll record the house, but part of it I'll do like a coffee cup up close that says welcome home with a blurry kitchen in the background. That came from an idea that I had by looking at a magazine one day, and I thought, I could figure that out. And now I do it, but now I go out and try to challenge myself by finding something else that's even better. And like I said, there's no shortage of people out there that are better than I am that inspire me every day. So,
Well, in the back of my head, Randy, I'm thinking here, what makes what I get to do here by interviewing the greats from around the world and so forth, and you're an excellent example of what makes my job so amazing, is because 35 years in the industry, I've seen your work, your photos are absolutely stunning, and yet you still find the time to sharpen that blade, to find out how you can make tomorrow a better day for yourself. Learn from, areas that you can improve off of tomorrow for yourself. I find that absolutely, truly inspiring, and good on you, man.
Thank you. I mean, it's what motivates me. I always joke with people and say, look, if when are you going to retire? I have no idea when I'm going to retire, but I will tell you this. If I drop dead in your front yard with a camera in my hand on a Wednesday, I would have been a better photographer on that Thursday. Okay, I guarantee you that. So, yeah, if I quit racing, then what else am I going to do, right?
What is your best photography related tip?
Oh man, that's tough. I would say learn all the time. I mean, really and truly, this is the part that amazes me, is I get questions all the time from people from all over the country, and the biggest question that I get from them is, where can I go to photo school to learn what you learned? Well, here's the ironic thing. I've had probably 20 people that wanted to shadow me, and they've come out to this part of the country, and I'll say, yeah, you can follow me around. As long as you're not working my market, I'll show you exactly what I do. You can go home, do it at your, kill it. That's fine. After a day, they're like, yeah, I'm going to go home early. This is too much work. Well, yeah, it is. I mean, if I ever had a boss that made me work the number of hours I make myself work, I'd have quit a long time ago. I mean, it's just one of those things. So my tip is learn this business and make sure that this is exactly what you want to do. Make sure you're in it for the right reasons. If this was, it can't be a money grab. It can't be, oh, I'm going to look cool in front of my friends, or I can, tell people at the next family or at the next class reunion what I do or whatever. It's got to be a passion, or there's no sense that you will hate it.
Impressive. And the thing I love about your answers here, Randy, there's so much continuity between the answers that you're giving to all my questions here, and it just really, I know I said this earlier to you folks here, Photography Talk, but again, I can't stress how many times you want to go back and listen to the nuggets that Randy is sharing here and look at how they all kind of connect to one. Impressive answers, Randy. And speaking of your photos, I have to ask you, you have some absolutely stunning, remarkable photos. What is your secret sauce when it comes to post-processing?
Well, I had to learn that, because when I first got out on the web, and real estate photography was really kind of started, for me at least, in Australia and England. They were doing a lot of stuff that we weren't doing here in the States, and that's where I burned a lot of bridges with I don't even think I'm allowed in England anymore, because I burned so many photographers out there. They just quit talking to me. No, it's not quite that bad. But The thing that I learned was that they were using high dynamic range photography to combine images to make their lighting look great. So I went out and bought a program called Photomatix by HDRsoft. Fantastic program. And I started shooting a dark, a medium, and a light exposure photograph, and then combining them through that HDRsoft product, Photomatix, and you know, they just came out great. Basically what you're doing is just extending the dynamic range of the camera. Now, it's not quite as critical as it used to be. In fact, instead of shooting 5 pictures like I used to, I shoot 3 now and combine them because the dynamic range of the cameras has gotten better. But it's still the best way that I know of to extend the range of the photo. So that's what I do. I go out, I shoot, you know, 3 or 4 frames, and then I'll combine them in HDRsoft's program, and you know, that's pretty much it. I mean, besides correcting color and, you know, straightening lines and doing all that stuff. So.
Now, speaking of the post-processing side, what is your post-processing workflow?
Okay, I'll go out and I shoot raw images. And the reason I shoot raw images is because they don't hold a color balance. You know, you can just set your white balance on auto and then correct them in post-processing. Some people don't know that, but you can set a raw file's white balance in post-processing the same as if you were setting it in camera. So there's really no reason to have anything that sets white balance on site when you can just do it later. So I go out and I shoot raw files. I bring them in. I go through and tweak them all for white balance and tweak them all for color.
Now, is this in Photoshop, Lightroom?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I import them using Lightroom.
Okay.
I hate to say this because it's going to make me sound like a dolt, but I have tried to learn Lightroom a million times and I've never had great luck with it. But I love the way it imports pictures. So I use Lightroom to import all the pictures. Then I go through in Adobe Camera Raw, and as a batch, I color correct all of my images. And really, Adobe Camera Raw is the develop module from Lightroom. I mean, they are essentially the same thing.
Yep.
So I tweak all the pictures, make the white balance right, I sharpen them, I correct the lens distortion in them, and then I batch file them as a JPEG. Now, the reason I do that is because the file size is much more manageable. I don't need all that raw data anymore. Once I've fixed them, I don't need the raw data anymore. And then I break them down to make sure I have exactly 3 frames of each after I've gotten the JPEGs out, and then I batch convert the JPEGs. Photomatix will batch convert to HDR. You can just go in and say, hey, take this file folder, grab them 3 at a time, and make HDRs for me. And then I go eat dinner with my wife, and then when I come back, here they all are. Now, I will still tweak them all by hand. I'll add a sky. I just bought a sky replacement software that works out real well. It's like Lumenza 4, I think, or something. Anyway, and so then I you know, a little tweaking to them. I'll take out a dust spot or take myself out of the mirrors in the bathroom. And then I upload them to a company called PhotoShelter that hosts my stuff, and I send them out to the realtors, and I send them out a bill right after that they can pay with a credit card online if they want to, or mail me a check. Then I shut everything down about 7 or 8 o'clock at night and get up the next day and do it again.
Boom, just like that.
Yeah, it's just kind of, it's almost like factory work anymore, except for the part where I'm not shooting, of course.
What would you like people to take away from your work? That
I love what I do. To be real honest with you, that I love what I do. I don't, you know, this is not like I said, this is not a money grab for me. This is not, I do this because I'm passionate about it. And it's funny, I'll go 3 weeks and maybe have 1 or 2 days off, and my wife will say, you're taking the weekend off, and I'll get so excited about it. And then 3 hours into that day off, I'm pacing the floor. And I'll pick up a lot and photograph the grandkids in front of the pool or something. It's just, I mean, it's what I was born to be.
That's awesome. Well, it shows. Randy, give me the top 3 must-have items in your camera bag.
First of all, a level, because it is a lot easier with architectural photography. nobody wants to buy a house if the walls look crooked in the pictures. And so I level my camera front to back and side to side. So I've always got a level in there. I carry about 1,000. I buy them 1,000 at a time. Those little tear-off alcohol strips that, alcohol pads that will clean their photographic quality, you know. And I use those for the camera and of course for my glasses too. I carry those everywhere I go. Of course, my wide-angle lens. I can't be without that. I carry, now this is the other thing too, and it's a little off topic of the question, but I carry doubles of everything. I have 2 Nikon D50s, or D750s. I have 2 wide-angle lenses. I have 2 tripods. I have a strobe light that I use. I have 2 of those. Because I guarantee you, when something fails, I will be 100 miles from the nearest camera store. So, I, double up everything.
What's the wide-angle lens that you prefer to use for most of your real estate work?
I've got 2. My main that I use 90% of the time is the Nikon 16 to 35 f4.
Mm-hmm.
I always get the numbers wrong. I think it's the 16 to 35 f4.
Yep.
It's a great lens. Weight is a concern with me all the time. So I want to make sure that I'm not carrying. I'm not 20. I know it's hard to believe. I'm not 20 anymore. So my backup lens is actually the Sigma, and I believe it's 14 to 30 f2.8. Another good lens, but I just use it as my backup because it's a little heavier. So if I drop my lens on a concrete porch, and I say that exact example because I did that one time, then I've got the other lens, and I'm 15 seconds away from just going back to work.
That's awesome. I'm really looking forward to my next question here because I know you're a reader, and I suspect we're going to get a really awesome answer here from you. If you were stuck on a deserted island, Randy, and you could only have one photography-related book with you, which book, Randy, would that be?
I'm going to give you a backup first. I would say Ansel Adams' The Negative is probably the most comprehensive book on understanding photography that you will ever read. But because it deals with film and developing and stuff, it's probably not going to be my number 1 because there's not much film developed anymore. I'm going to really go off the charts, and this is, you're not going to, you'll say, oh, I didn't expect that. There's a guy out there named David Zeisser, who is probably one of the premier wedding photographers in the country. And he wrote a book called Capturing the Light. Okay. Even if you're not a wedding photographer, it is one of those books that gives you a better comprehensive understanding of how a flash works and how lighting ratios work. It's one of those books where you read page 16 and then you flip to page 17 and then you go, no, wait a minute. And then you flip back to page 16 again. If you get through that book, read the whole thing, you will literally have a better understanding of photographic light than anybody that will ever teach you anything. It really is that good. Solid.
Boom. Final question, Randy, and this is a fun one, brother. Life has been found on another planet, and none other than Sir Richard Branson is piloting the Virgin Galactic and has asked you to come along to document the journey. The challenge is you could only bring 1 camera, 2 lenses, and 2 other items. What would you bring?
I'd bring the Nikon D750 because I know it in my sleep. So I've literally got 2 of them. I'm on my 4th shutter on one and my 3rd shutter on the other one. So I know that camera pretty well. I'd probably bring my 16 to 35 f4, and my other lens that I own is I think it's a 35 to 300 or 28 to 300 f 3.5 to 5.6, something like that, just for the range. And it's a good piece of glass. I mean, it's not a super high-end lens, but it's a good piece of glass. That would cover the biggest range. And I've got another one I can bring. I would probably I use a 680 watt strobe made by Flashpoint that I use to light houses so that I can get the color balance right. I'd probably bring that with me. And I'm going to cheat and give you a 4th one. I'd bring a golf ball. Now you think that's a joke, but a lot of people want to know how I do white balance. If I've got a room that's all yellow, the ceiling's yellow, the walls are yellow, there's nothing white in the house, I pull a golf ball out of my pocket, I throw it out onto the carpet, and then I'm able to click on the golf ball in post-production, and it perfectly white balances the room, and then I just Photoshop the golf ball out. So I cheat, bring the golf ball along when Richard had his back turned. So
that's funny. When she bring a golf ball, I'm like I suspect all the viewers kind of lean in a little bit. Go, okay, what is he doing with that golf ball? That's funny. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's and where I got that from was every kitchen that I'd go into, I'd leave the paper towels on the counter, and it was always the white balance. I always nailed it. If you clicked your clicker on that paper towel roll, it always got the white balance perfect. And I thought, I need something for, obviously I can't have paper towels in every room, so I need something small and white. I know you could use a gray card or something, but sometimes you have a hard time standing them up. I just take a golf ball with me, toss it out into the room, click on it, everything goes just about dead on perfect on white balance. So, yeah, there you go.
Randy, what an amazing journey you've had, my friend. Before we part ways, can you share with our listeners one final piece of advice, also where they can find you on the web, and we'll say goodbye.
Sure. My final piece of advice is, and I think I gave it before, don't stop learning. I mean, trust me, as a kid growing up in a town of 3,500 people in Grangeville, Idaho, surrounded by 100 miles of woods, you do not know how good you have it now. You do not know how unbelievable it is that you can open your phone and watch real-time videos in Beijing, China. And the amount of free material, or material like what you offer, that is out there, that is available to people at such a low cost. I could right now get a better education in photography than I got in 2 years and $10,000 worth of photo school. And I don't think people realize just exactly how valuable all that is. So keep learning, watch all the videos you can, challenge yourself, look at people that are better than you are. Instead of looking at people that aren't as good and saying, hey, I'm better than they are, look at people that are way better than you are and say, that's who I want to be tomorrow.
Where can they find you?
And also, my website, because you said something about the website. It's hendersonimages.com. It's a website that I was very smart to buy many, many, many years ago, because you couldn't find hendersonimages.com. Now I'd have to be .photo or .org or something, I'm sure. But it's hendersonimages.com. Check it out. If you want to know more about real estate photography, my phone number's out on there. You know, I love talking about it. So just, it's out there if you need it.
Boom. Guys, what did I say in the beginning of this interview? This was going to be an impressive interview, and Randy did not disappoint. If you want to learn more about Randy and today's show, take a look at the show notes at photographytalk.com/Randy-Henderson. Randy, it was an absolute honor to have you on the show. We really appreciate your generous time. We'll see you next time.
All right, sounds good. Take care.